let's talk about the raw processing stage of this portrait. Now when it comes to raw processing, I'm going to be using Capture One in specific just because that's a processing software that I use when I'm retouching. Now if you want to use any other processing software, you're free to do so because all these terms will carry over no matter what you're using. And if you're completely unfamiliar with Capture One, for instance, you can check out my video that I've already done with RGG EDU on getting used to the program and knowing all about it as well. Now over here we have this image, again, that Danny shot, and one of the things that I like about portraits when it comes to the processing stage is I can kind of keep it really natural and organic. And what I mean by that is a lot of times when you have a really good portrait shooter, there's not a lot of settings to necessarily adjust, and it's less engrossing as, say, doing something like a beauty image or a really high contrast image. For instance, because this image was shot really soft, you notice that there's a really beautiful gradient from highlights to shadows. Now what that tells me is that, number one, there's a lot of detail in both aspects, so I don't have to do any recovery at all. I, for instance, also know that with the white balance itself, I don't have to change very much either because it isn't something that's extremely stylized. When it comes to the retouching aspect, I will ask my client whether or not he prefers a white balance at a specific setting, if he already hasn't supplied it. Typically, they will tell me what they want. If it's up to my choice, I ask them for their interpretation, if they want something warmer or cooler, and go that route. But initially, right now, before the retouching portion, I'm going to keep it quite neutral. So as you notice over here on the white balance setting, and for me, this is my layout over here. I've of course moved around my little tabs in case you need to as well. But just find your white balance setting on your processor. And as you can see, I've left it as shot because I think the color tones are quite neutral. I usually won't use something to measure them out like some of you might do for studio shots or something like that, because I feel for me, the way my style is, the way that it looks by eye is really important for me if my screen's already really calibrated. And tint itself, I'm not going to mess with unless there's a specific reason to, because as you notice here, moving left and right, it gives green and purple casts, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to double click that, reset that, keep the Kelvin the same. What I will do though in this instance is I'm going to ensure that these shadows over here that I brought up are put back so you can see what the original transition's like, and then bring that back up because that's something that I think was very favorable to me. Now, also to note, this is Danny's image, and Danny would obviously do this in a way that's completely different than mine. If you check out his tutorial, you'll be able to see some of his mentality and processes that goes into his portrait, which also makes a really interesting point when you have someone like me retouching his images. I feel like whenever you are a photographer and give out your raw files, it's kind of like giving a little bit of your soul away. You kind of allow other people to see something that not many people get to see. And it's very brave of Danny in this instance to show his raw files and have other people work on it. And what's fascinating about that whole process is that the end result always changes based on who works on them. And it really goes to show that there's not necessarily right or wrong when it comes to portrait retouching or processing. It's always about your identity and what you want to get out of the portrait itself, as well as client expectations. So with that being said, the only other thing that I want to change in the processing step in this area is making sure that my shadows have some detail, my highlights have some detail, and the white balance is quite neutral. Aside from that, I keep everything pretty much as is, and I keep sharpening off when I'm exporting as well, because I want to keep the sharpening for the later stages when I'm done with the retouching process. When you sharpen an image before actually exporting, what tends to happen is you create a lot of work for yourself before retouching, because all these details are amplified, and you want to leave that till everything is perfected. Because once everything's perfected and then you sharpen, it looks much more appealing. So with that being said, the next thing we're going to do is move on to our retouching process.